저놈을 추적해!
빈틈 투성이군. 스틸레이터.
Manager Bud, it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. Library. Bus. You get the point. Our favorite bugman received a new ID, courtesy of our favorite library. The problem is, Greg Allen has a glaring issue. But, with Ishmael's help, he can get a leg up on the competition. Anyways, Gregor and Ahab have some synergy. By some synergy, I mean it in the most loose way possible. To understand how Gregor can get a step ahead on the competition, let's quickly talk about his kit. Gregor's main mechanic is dependent on the wounds effects, and to those who don't know, he applies 3 types of wounding: open, deep, and fatal. Open wounds are the easiest to access, with all the attacks applying this effect. Having 2 open wounds on an enemy, or enemy part, by the end of the turn converts the open wounds into deep wounds. Functionally, the wounds just work by adding bleed and potency count with every time a tremor burst occurs, varying in value with the specific degree of the wound applied. With that out of the way, let's discuss our focus on the benefits of attacking enemies with them, as this is how Gregor can access his full potential, for the extremely brief moment it allows you. Like I said, open wounds are easily accessible with all his attacks, and, not counting the tremor burst effect, are only used to access deep wounds. Speaking of deep wounds, it only has one purpose: empowering his skill 3, which turns it into an unbreakable attack that deals a staggering amount of effects, mainly tremor burst, which synergizes with his wounding. Finally, fatal wounds is the wounding type that allows him to follow up his skill 2 and 3 with mercy. So long as the targets have fatal wounds, mercy will always occur after each of these attacks. Well, up to 2 times. Normally, this only occurs when he's attacking enemies under 20% HP. So naturally, applying fatal wounds consistently before the enemy's HP drops below that threshold is ideal for maximizing his value. However, the kit has 3 problems. First of all, the uptime of wounding. As with the exception of open, all wound types reduce by 1 with each turn. At the same time, it blocks any application of open wounds, meaning the uptime is limited to however many is given to you initially. And there's no way to refresh wounding while having wounds. Therefore, you will always have a turn where Gregor is comparatively at his weakest. This is because accessing fatal wounds requires at least 1 turn to allow the open wounds to convert into deep wounds. That is assuming you have the opportunity to apply 2 open wounds in the same turn. And then, once you have deep wounds, you have 3 turns to use a skill 3 for its empowered variant in order to convert it into fatal wounds. However, unlike open wounds, deep wounds will expire after 3 turns, meaning that if you're not lucky enough to get a skill 3 during the 3 turns an enemy has a deep wound, you are back to square 1, or wound 1, with needing to start from open wounding again. That being said, the stacks of deep wounds do not affect however many fatal wounds you inflict, and as long as you have at least 1 deep wound when you perform his skill 3, you are always rewarded with 3 fatal wounds. Lastly, the downtime of wounding is also quite painful to experience. Once you realize that for every 2 turns of fatal wounds, assuming you're lucky enough to have a skill 3 ready and can constantly apply 2 open wounds at an appropriate time, you will also have 2 turns where, again, Gregor does not have access to his best self. Comparing him to a similar syndicate combat philosophy, Kurokumo members also rely on status application for empowerment. Kurokumo members are empowered when attacking bleeding enemies, with Ryoshu doing 20% more damage, our favorite bug guy having more coin power, and Ishmael benefiting with both. The difference here is, in ideal situations, one where they can apply the bleed, they will always have their empowered states. If played well, they can sustain this indefinitely, unlike Gregor, who always has to have a refractory period due to the inability to sustain his wounding while it is active. There is nuance to this situation, however. The payoff for his empowered state being so fleeting is that he can deal a great deal of damage by himself. Having a 4-coin unbreakable attack followed by a state that allows him to attack twice more each turn is substantially stronger than just +2 coin power or 20% extra damage. If we can mitigate some of these issues by reducing the downtime and reliably have access to either deep or fatal wounds in a more consistent manner, he would feel significantly better. More specifically for focus encounters, where in a full team he is only allowed to attack once. Normally you would assume that his ally's ability to trigger Mercy would be a reliable method to apply 2 open wounds in one turn. However, it falls into the same problem of the really steep requirement of needing the enemy to have less than 20% HP. This is where Ahab comes into play. Her skill 2 gives the unit to her immediate right an attack opportunity. Having her give this to Gregor means that, in focus encounters, Gregor can attack twice and apply 2 open wounds in one turn, effectively reducing the downtime of deep wounding in half, which then makes the flow of his combat string a lot simpler, as you are hopefully able to convert each tier of wounds with every turn. The save turn means that you can effectively sequence or assign your coins with each turn. Turn 1 is used for gap attack, with another received for Ishmael for the application of 2 open wounds. This is the best coin to use as it does not have the mercy trigger and is the most common one in your kit. Then in turn 2, you use skill 3 for the deep to fatal conversion. And lastly, in the 2 turns that your enemy is fatally wounded, skills 2 or 3 would be ideal for the mercy afterwards. The only possible issue is Gregor's placement on the dashboard. However, their speed values are relatively synergistic, as Gregor's lowest and highest speed values are both 1 less than Ahab, meaning that should their speeds remain consistent, there is never a turn where Gregor is faster than Ishmael. He will always be to the right of her. However, in actual practice, this is complicated due to random speed bonuses that every unit receives, but we have to work with what we have here. Therefore, in conclusion, Gregor is a great unit whose only problems are the access and up and down times of his wounds. Compared to IDs with similar combat philosophies, the empowered state he can have is rather fleeting, but is significantly more rewarding with a more powerful unbreakable skill, followed by 4 extra attacks across 2 turns. While this state is somewhat fickle, specifically in focus encounters where he only has 1 attack per turn, using Ahab skill 2 allows him to attack twice in 1 turn, effectively reducing his downtime in half, and making the experience of using him much smoother. He's not as consistent as Disperdion, but he's still a good unit. So let's not be too hasty in running to Reddit to complain about this batch of Walpurgis units for not being as strong and powerful as the last one. Instead, let's actually explore methods in which we can maximize their value. Because if the pendulum swung the other way, we'd all be crying about the game's power creep. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to drink plenty of water.